reason. I'm not even going to be live long. Like I just out this book. Anywho, suppose though that the scribe got all the words 100% correct. If multiple copies of the letter went out, can we be sure that all the copies were also 100% correct? It is possible, at least, that even if they were all copied in Paul's presence, a word or two here or there got changed in one of the other copies. If so, what if only one of the copies served as the copy from which all subsequent copies were made? Then, in the first century, into the second century, and the third century, and so on. In that case, the oldest copy that provided the basis for all subsequent copies of the letter was not exactly what Paul wrote or wanted to write. Once the copy is in circulation, that is, once it arrives at its destination in one of the towns of Galatia, it, of course, gets copied and mistakes get made. Sometimes scribes might intentionally change the text. Sometimes accidents happen. These mistake-written copies get copied, and the mistake-written copies of the copies get copied, and so on down the line. Somewhere in the midst of all this, the original copy, or each of the original copies, ends up getting lost, or worn out, or destroyed. At some point, it is no longer possible to compare a copy with the original to make sure it's correct, even if someone has the bright idea of doing so. What survives today, then, is not the original copy of the letter, nor one of the first copies that Paul himself had made, nor any of the copies that were produced in any of the towns of Galatia to which the letters were sent, nor any of the copies of those copies. The first reasonable complete copy we have of Galatians is a papyrus called P46, since it was the 46th New Testament papyrus to be cataloged, which dates to about 200 CE. That's approximately 150 years after Paul wrote the letter. It had been in circulation, being copied, sometimes correctly and sometimes incorrectly, for 15 decades before any copy was made that has survived down to the present day. We cannot reconstruct the copy from which P46 was made. Was it an accurate copy? If so, how accurate? It surely had mistakes of some kind, as did the copy from which it was copied, and the copy from which that copy was copied, and so on. In short, it is a very complicated business. It reasonably reflects what Paul himself actually wrote, or he intended to write when he dictated the letter. As an example of the problems, let's take the Gospel of John. This gospel is quite different from the other three gospels of the New Testament, telling a range of stories that differ from theirs and employing a very different style of writing. Here in John, the sayings of Jesus are long discourses rather than pithy, direct sayings. Jesus never tells a parable, for example, in John, unlike in the other three gospels. Moreover, the events narrated in John are often found only in this gospel. For example, Jesus' conversations with Nicodemus and with the Samaritan woman, or his miracles of turning water into wine and raising Lazarus from the dead. The author's portrayal of Jesus is quite different too. Unlike in the other three gospels, Jesus spends much of his time explaining who he is and doing signs in order to prove that what he says about himself is true. John no doubt had sources for his account, possibly a source that narrated Jesus' signs, for example, and sources that described his discourses. He put these sources together into his own flowing narrative, his life, ministry, death, and resurrection. It is possible, though, that John actually produced several different versions of his gospel. Readers have long noted, for example, that chapter 21 appears to be a later add-on. The gospel certainly seems to come to an end in chapter 20, verses 30 through 31, and the events of chapter 21 seem to be a kind of afterthought, possibly added to fill out the story of Jesus' resurrection appearances and to explain that when the beloved disciple responsible for narrating the tradition, this highly celebrated poem speaks of the Word of God, who existed with God from the beginning and was himself who became flesh In Jesus fucking Christ. I added the fucking. The passage is written in a highly poetic style not found in the rest of the gospel. Moreover, while its central themes are repeated in the rest of the narrative, some of its most important vocabulary is not. Thus, Jesus is portrayed throughout the narrative as the one who came from above, but never is he called the Word elsewhere in the gospel. It is possible that this opening passage came from a different source than the rest of the accounts, and that it was added as an appropriate beginning by the author after an earlier edition of the book had already been published. Assume for a second, just for the sake of the argument, that chapter 21 and chapter 1 through 18 were not original components of the gospel. What does that do for the textual critic who wants to reconstruct the original text? Which original is being constructed? All our Greek manuscripts contain the passages in question. So, does the textual critic reconstruct as the original text the form of the gospel that originally contained them? But shouldn't we consider the original form to be the earlier version, which lacked them? And if one wants to reconstruct that earlier form, is it fair to stop there with reconstructing, say, the first edition of John's Gospel? Why not go even further and try to reconstruct the sources that lie behind the Gospel, such as the sign sources and the discourse sources, or even oral traditions that lie behind them? These are questions that plague textual critics and that have led some to argue that we should abandon any quest for the original text, since we can't even agree on what it might mean to talk about the original of, say, Galatians or John. For my part, however, I continue to think that even if we can't be 100% certain about what we can attain to, we can at least be certain that all the surviving manuscripts were copied from other manuscripts, which were themselves copied from other manuscripts, and that it is at least possible to get back to the oldest and earliest stage of the manuscript tradition for each of the books of the New Testament. All our manuscripts of Galatians, for example, evidently go back to some text that was copied. All our manuscripts of John evidently go back to a version of John that included the prologue and chapter 21. And so we must rest content knowing that getting back to the earliest attainable version is the best we can do, whether or not we've reached back to the original text. This oldest form of the text is no doubt closely, in fact, very closely, related to what the author originally wrote, and so it is the basis for our interpreting of his teaching. Reconstructing the texts of the New Testament. If you have this book, what I'm reading is Misquoting Jesus, the story behind who changed the Bible and why, by Bart Ehrman. So if you have it, I'm on page 63. Anyway, similar problems, of course, apply to all our early Christian writings, both those in the New Testament and those outside of it, whether Gospels, Acts, Epistles, Apocalypses, or any of the other kinds of early Christian writing. The task of the textual critic is to determine what the earliest form of the text is for all these writings. As we'll see, there are established principles for making this determination, ways of deciding which differences in our manuscripts are mistakes, which are intentional changes, and which appear to go back to the original author. But it's not an easy task. The result, on the other hand, can be extremely enlightening, interesting, and even exciting. Textual critics have been able to determine with relative certainty a number of places in which manuscripts that survive do not represent the original text of the New Testament. For those who are not at all familiar with the field, but who know the New Testament, some of the results can be surprising. To conclude this chapter, I will discuss two such passages from the Gospels, in this case, that we are now fairly certain did not originally belong in the New Testament, even though they became popular parts of the Bible for Christians down through the centuries and remain so today. The woman taken in adultery. The story of Jesus and the woman taken in adultery is arguably the best known story about Jesus in the Bible. It certainly has always been a favorite in Hollywood versions of his life. It even makes it into Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, although that movie focuses only on Jesus' last hours. The story is treated in one of the rare flashbacks. Despite its popularity, the account is found only in one passage of the New Testament, in John 7:53 through 8, verse 12, and it appears not to have been original even there. The storyline is familiar. Jesus is teaching in the temple, and a group of scribes and Pharisees, his sworn enemies, approach him, bringing with them a woman who, quote, had been caught in the very act of adultery. They bring her before Jesus because they want to put him to the test. The law of Moses, as they tell him, demands that such a one be stoned to death. But they want to know what he has to say about the matter. Should they stone her or show her pity? It is a trap, of course, because if Jesus tells them to let the woman go, he will be accused of violating the law of God. If he tells them to stone her, he will be accused of dismissing his own teachings of love, mercy, and forgiveness. Jesus does not immediately reply. Instead, he stoops to write on the ground. If I had brought this woman to this man, and then this fool get down on the ground and starts fingering, fucking the dirt, I'm like, excuse me, sir. If you wouldn't mind standing the fuck up and addressing me like grown men, we're trying to have a conversation. What are you doing on the fucking ground? What are you making, sand angels? Get the hell out of here. We're trying to do some litigation, Mr. Jesus. What the actual fuck? What is he doing? Hey, get your boy. Get him up off the ground. What is it even that he's scribbling? What is that chicken shit scratch? You know what? Never mind. I'm just going to go ahead and get the fuck out of here. We're going to get the fuck out of here, actually. So, have a nice day. Anyways, it's so fucking stupid. Anyway, where was I? So, Jesus does not immediately reply. Instead, he stoops to write on the ground. When they continue to question him, he says to them, "Let the one who is without sin among you be the first to cast a stone at her." He then returns to his writing on the ground like a fucking child, while those who have brought the woman start to leave the scene, evidently feeling convicted of their own wrongdoing, until no one is left but the woman. Looking up, Jesus says, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one who condemns you?" To which she replies, "No one, Lord." He then... What if she really did say it like that? "No one, Lord." I'm stupid as fuck. "No one, Lord." He then responds, "Neither do I condemn you. Now piss off and don't fuck up anymore, all right? Let me find out." It's a brilliant story filled with pathos and a clever twist in which Jesus uses his wits to get himself, not to mention the poor woman, off the hook. Of course, to a careful reader, the story raises numerous questions. If this woman was caught in the act of adultery, for example, where is the man that she was caught with? Both of them are to be stoned according to the law of Moses. Moreover, when Jesus wrote on the ground, what exactly was he writing? According to one ancient tradition, he was writing the sins of the accusers, who, seeing that their own transgressions were known, left in embarrassment. And even if Jesus did teach a message, did he really think that the law of God given by Moses was no longer in force and should not be obeyed? Did he think sin should not be punished at all? See, this is what the fuck. This the type of shit that got him fucked up. He fucked himself up. It's just like Christians say, God doesn't send you to hell. You send yourself to hell. Goddamn right. We didn't send him to the cross. He sent himself there with his dumb ass. He should have did what the fuck the law dictated. Anywho, it's just like Christians. They can never do what the fuck Jesus instructs because Jesus can't be bothered to do what the law of Moses instructs. It's par for the course with these motherfuckers. Anywho. Despite the brilliance of the story, its captivating quality, and its inherent intrigue. There is one other enormous problem it poses. As it turns out, it was not originally in the Gospel of John. In fact, it was not originally part of any of the Gospels. It was added by later scribes. How do we know this? In fact, scholars who work on the manuscript tradition have noticed that scholars adduce for making judgments of this sort. Here, I'm simply to point out a few basic facts that have proved convincing to nearly all scholars of every persuasion. The story is not found in our oldest and best manuscripts of the Gospels of John. Its writing style is very different from what we find in the rest of John. And it includes a large number of words and phrases that are otherwise alien to the Gospel. The conclusion is unavoidable. This passage was not originally part of the Gospel. How then did it come to be added? There are numerous theories about that. Most scholars think that it was probably a well-known story circulating in the oral tradition about Jesus, which at some point was added in the margin of a manuscript. From these, some scribe or other thought that the marginal note was meant to be part of the text and so inserted it immediately after the account that ends in John 7:52. It's noteworthy that other scribes inserted the account in different locations in the New Testament, some of them after John 21:25, for example, and others, interesting enough, after Luke 21:38. In any event, whoever wrote the account twasn't John. That naturally leaves readers with a dilemma. If this story was not originally part of John, should it be considered part of the Bible at all? Not everyone will respond to this question in the same way, but for most textual critics, the answer is no. The last 12 verses of Mark. I think most of us atheists who have read the Bible are familiar with this upcoming conundrum. The second example that we will consider may not be may not be as familiar to the casual reader of the Bible, but it has been highly influential in the history of biblical interpretation and poses comparable problems for the scholars of the textual tradition of the New Testament. The examples come from the Gospel of Mark and concerns its ending. In Mark's account, we are told that Jesus is crucified and then buried by Joseph of Arimathea on the day before the Sabbath. On the day after Sabbath, Mary Magdalene and two other women come back to the tomb in order to promptly anoint the body. When they arrive, they find that the stone has been rolled away. Entering the tomb, they see a young man in a white robe who tells them, quote, "Do not be startled. You are seeking Jesus the Nazarene who has been crucified. He has been raised and is not here. See right there where they laid him at." He then instructs the women to tell the disciples that Jesus is preceding them into Galilee and that they will see him there, just as he told you. However, the women flee the tomb and say nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Then comes the last 12 verses of Mark. In many modern English translations, verses that continue the story. Jesus himself is said to appear to Mary Magdalene, who goes and tells the disciples, but they don't believe her. He then appears to two others, and finally to the 11 disciples, the 12 not including Judas, who are gathered together at table. Jesus breaks them for failing to believe, and then commissions them to go forth and proclaim his gospel. Those who believe and are baptized will be saved, but those who do not will be condemned. And then come two of the most intriguing verses of the passage. And these are the signs that will accompany those who believe. They will cast out demons in my name. They will speak in new tongues. And they will take up snakes in their hands. And if they drink any poison, it will not harm them. They will place their hands upon the sick and heal them. Jesus was full of shit. Okay. And subsequently, every one of these Christian preachers who purport to perform acts of a divine nature, for instance, are also full of shit. And all of their congregants who support it, who know that they're full of shit, are also full of shit. Maybe not so much the parishioners, but those who are assisting the preacher and whatnot, they're also full of shit. Jesus is then taken up into heaven and seated at the right hand of God, and the disciples go forth into the world, proclaiming the gospel, their words being confirmed by the signs that accompany them. It's a terrific passage, mysterious, moving, and powerful. It's one of the passages used by Pentecostal Christians to show that Jesus' followers will be able to speak in unknown tongues, as happens in their own services of worship, and it is the principal passage used by groups of Appalachian snake handlers who, till this day, take poisonous snakes in their hands in order to demonstrate their faith in the words of Jesus, that when doing so, they will come to no harm. But there's one problem. Once again, this passage was not originally in the Gospel of Mark. It was added by a later scribe. In some ways, this textual problem is more disputed than the passage about the woman taken in adultery, because without these final verses, Mark has a very different and hard to understand ending. It doesn't mean that scholars are inclined, as we'll see momentarily. The reasons for taking them to be in addition are solid, almost indisputable. But scholars debate what the genuine ending of Mark actually was, given the circumstances that this ending found in many English translations and in later Greek manuscripts is not the original. The evidence that these verses were not original to Mark is similar in kind to that for the passage about the woman taken in adultery. And again, I don't need to go into all the details here. The verses are absent from our two oldest and best manuscripts of Mark's gospel, along with other important witnesses. The writing style varies from what we find elsewhere in Mark. The transition between this passage and the one preceding it is hard to understand. For example, Mary Magdalene is introduced in verse 9 as if she hadn't been mentioned yet, even though she is discussed in the preceding verses. There's another problem with the Greek that makes the transition even more awkward. And there was a large number of words and phrases in the passage that are not found elsewhere in Mark. In short, the evidence is sufficient to convince nearly all textual scholars that these verses are an addition to Mark. Without them, though, the story ends rather abruptly. Notice what happens when their verses are taken away. This is what happens when you take those verses away. The women are told to inform the disciples that Jesus will precede them to Galilee and meet them there. But they, the women, flee the tomb and say nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that's where the gospel ends. Obviously, scribes thought the ending was too abrupt. The woman told no one? Then, did the disciples never learn of the resurrection? And didn't Jesus himself ever appear to them? How could that be the ending? To resolve the problem, scribes added an ending. Some scholars agree with the scribes in thinking that Mark 16:8 is too abrupt an ending for a gospel. As I have indicated, it is not that these scholars believe the final 12 verses in our later manuscripts were the original ending. They know that's not the case. But they think possibly the last page of Mark's gospel, one in which Jesus actually did meet the disciples in Galilee, was somewhat lost, and that all our copies of the gospels go back to this one truncated manuscript without the last page. That explanation is entirely plausible. It is also possible, in the opinions of yet other scholars, that Mark did indeed mean to end his gospel with verse 8 in chapter 16. It certainly is a shocker of an ending. The disciples never learn the truth of Jesus' resurrection because the women never tell them. One reason for thinking that this could be how Mark ended his gospel is that some such ending coincides so well with other motifs throughout his gospel. As students of Mark have long noticed, The disciples never do seem to get it in this gospel. And like, also, it's interesting to note that Mark, when someone comes to understand something about Jesus orders that person to shut the fuck up. And yet, the person ignores what Jesus says and spreads the news. Typical fucking Christian behavior. Jesus says one thing, the motherfucker to whom he says it completely jettisons what he was just told and does what the fuck he wants to do. Typical Christian shit. I'm not angry though. I just think it's hilarious. It's just fucking funny to me. Just like people not doing what Jesus told them to do is biblical. I just think that's funny. Like that's probably the most like being like I'm trying to think of the way to say it. It's not being Christ-like, but I guess that's the one way in which you reflect the Bible, just in a way where others in the Bible also behave in like fashion. You know what I mean? They didn't do what the fuck Jesus said, and Christians today don't do what Jesus said. It's funny, like it was even in the Bible. Jesus be like, "All right, look, you're welcome, right? But don't just keep it between us, okay? Don't tell anybody." And the motherfucker's like, "You got it." Yo, Jesus just fucking healed me, son. You know, every fucking time. It was like, every time. It was like, what? I'm just not surprised anymore. I'm not surprised that Christians refuse to do as their Jesus instructs, because no one did what Jesus instructs. You know what? To me, that's almost like evidence. You know what I'm saying? Evidence in support of this notion that perhaps he wasn't as deserving of the unction that he received. You know what I mean? Like perhaps he was like David Koresh. You know what I mean? Just had a godlike fucking complex, but was just a regular fucking dude. You know what I mean? That's what I think he was. That's why I'm like, I'll give Christians that he lived. But so what? David Koresh lived. I don't give a shit. Like, it doesn't mean anything. What is that with Marshall Applewhite or whatever the fuck of the fucking Heaven's Gate cult? Yeah, he lived. So what? Does that really mean there was a fucking spaceship in the back of the Haley-Bopp comet? Get the fuck out of here. Like, no. The two don't know. Okay. I will accept that Jesus existed, but he was just a regular fucking dude. Regular in the sense that he was not divine. Okay, but he was probably definitely special. Anywho. In short, Mark may well have been intended to bring his reader up short with his abrupt ending. A clever way to make the reader stop, take a faltering breath, and ask, what? Conclusion. The passages discussed above represent just 2 out of thousands of places. Thousands of places in which the manuscripts of the New Testament came to be changed by scribes. In both of the examples, we're dealing with additions that scribes made to the text, additions of sizable length. So, although most of the changes are not of this magnitude, there are lots of significant changes and lots more insignificant ones in our surviving manuscripts of the New Testament. In the chapters that follow, we will want to see how scholars began to discover these changes and how they developed methods for figuring out what the oldest form of the text is. We will especially like to see more examples of where this text has been changed and how these changes affected our English translations of the Bible. I'd like to end this chapter simply with an observation about a particularly acute irony that we seem to have discovered. As we saw in chapter 1, Christianity from the outset was a bookish religion that stressed certain texts as authoritative scripture. As we've seen in this chapter, however, we don't actually have these authoritative texts. This is a textually oriented religion whose texts have been changed, surviving only in copies that vary from one another, sometimes in highly significant ways. The task of the textual critic is to try to recover the oldest form of these texts. This is obviously a crucial task, since we can't interpret the words of the New Testament if we don't know what the words were. Moreover, as I hope should be clear by now, knowing the words is important, not just for those who consider the words divinely inspired. It's important for anyone who thinks of the New Testament as a significant book. And surely everyone interested in this history, science, and culture of Western civilization thinks so, because the New Testament, if nothing else, is an enormous cultural artifact, a book that is revered by millions, and that lies at the foundation of the largest religion of the world today. That's the end of chapter 2. The hypocritical cynic, what blessing could make you take the 666 off the end of your name? I'll do it, man. What now? What up, man? Keep trolling these Christians. Thanks, Mayan Stevenson. Zephora Voltaire, my fault. Wolfie. Xavier, don't. You're funny. Xavier says, lol, what, Wolfie? I really was atheist for 4 years, my guy. Zephora says, cynic? Was it? Leave him alone. Yeah! I'm a Satanist. Oh, wow, I missed a lot of shit. What was all kind of discourse of the beach? My fault, everybody, for those who were in here and I didn't say anything. Can you please just study the Quran? What the actual fuck? I am not at all interested in that nonsense. If I were in a country in which Islam were the, dominating religion, then I would be on that. But that ain't where I'm at. So, Christianity it is. Motherfuckers be so butthurt that I be shitting on Christianity. Except Muslims, of course. Not that they're any better. Both religions are garbage, in my opinion. I just think Christianity is more of a threat. You know what I mean? Because it's, at least in the West, it has the backing of capital. Those other religions don't. So, Christianity it is. Let me go down to the bottom. I'm all the way up. AR in the bitch! What up, AR? You ever thought you could be a straw for a giant? I would be a silly straw. Actually, what? That was a lazy, excuse me. It's probably because I haven't had any coffee. At least not in a couple of hours. Dade! I'm he. What up, what up, AR and the bitch? The most influential in America. Correct, Jiffy Lube. Correct. I should have made y'all moderators, man. Like Jiffy Lube. I know you be moderating. What up, Luna? Thanks. I don't feel like a goat. Actually, no, I take that back. I am a goat amongst sheep. I'm sorry, but theoretically, everyone has a smartphone and nobody can spell. Lol. I know it's weird. What's up, Edward? How doeth you? Jesus loves you, buddy. Shut the fuck up, Josh. What's up, Jonathan? There would be no devil without God. I don't know how you can know that, but sure. I'll give you that. Doesn't bother me any. I don't give a fuck. Nah, I'm too crazy, Dade. I hear you, brother or sister or whatever. You know. What up? Not your father. I don't know. I might be somebody if I'm just bullshitting. I don't have no motherfucking kids. No kids, son. I got Rosie. Rosie. Never mind. Stay where you at. Danny B. Why y'all all asleep? Where's Louie? Damn, Petunia sleep? Everybody sleep. Brother. Oh, okay. Do I like Axty Black Diamond? Cut it out, bro. Cut it out. You know I like Axty. You know I do. Butterflies and lullabies, some shit. I forget what it's called. Like, hold on, let me think of it. It's like butterflies and hold on and butterflies. No, love. Fuck lullaby. Fuck. I can't think of the name of it. Go to sleep, Unc. Go to sleep, Unc. What's up? I like the song "Fragile in Dark Eyes" by Axty. I like the one I was just talking about that I can't think of for some reason. I like really like all their songs that are like super heavy. I don't like the ones where it's all like, I don't know, man, bro can't really sing that well for real, for real. Like he can scream his ass off, he can growl, he can do all that shit. He's a fucking monster with that, but like his like clean vocals don't sound so great to me, in my opinion. I'm just saying I can't do it, but I'm just saying like he ain't no goddamn Will Ramos. You know what I mean? Like Will Ramos got them clean vocals and them clean them lows and shit. Will Ramos is the fucking goat, dog. But I like also like CJ McCreery. I also like Ben Dewar. You know what I mean? I like a lot of these guys, man. Like, you got some fucking Arlena. Hey, Dad, how do you deal with all the Christians who never stop claiming they have proof of God? Well, I implore them to present said evidence, but they never have it. It's usually just a fallacious argument, teleological, or is just like I'm God or Spinoza's God. You know, it will never get you to your specific God. You know what I mean? Like never get you to the Hindu God or the Christian God or whatever. You know, you can never like make that argument. Not in good faith. Not in all rationality. You know what I mean? The best you can do is just come up with some deist God, some undistinct God who just got it all started and then fucked off. You know what I mean? Doesn't answer prayers, doesn't want you to do anything. He was just like, here's everything, boom, I'm out of here. You know, like a deadbeat dad and his bitch. So that's the best you can do. There's no logical argument that'll get you from that. That'll get you from, say, for instance, the Kalam cosmological argument, right? Which is William Lane Craig's go-to fucking garbage of an argument. But anywho, which is essentially that everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause for its existence. That's the best you can do. It's like, all right, fine. But how do you get from, and that cause is my God who doesn't want you to have gay sex? It's like, what the fuck? How do we know? It doesn't even have to be something with agency. Like, why do we presuppose this person-like figure, you know what I mean, that has wants and desires or whatever the fuck? which is antithetical to the notion of it being all knowing, or rather perfect. You know what I mean? Which, what does perfect even mean? You know what I mean? Like, I forget who it was. It was in one of the books I read, but he was grappling with this notion of perfection, and it was like, as an imperfect being, like when we use perfect, we usually mean it in so far as its utility. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, this is perfect for that. You know what I mean? Or that looks perfect. And by that, we probably just mean symmetrical, or it's aesthetically pleasing, or whatever. You know what I mean? But what do we mean by actual perfection? What is it, like numerically perfect? And even so, how do you know that? Just from looking at it. You know, it's what do we mean by perfect? And how, even more so, how could an imperfect being recognize perfection in any form? I don't understand how one could do that. I don't understand how an imperfect being could even recognize perfection. Like, you don't even know that's what you're looking at. Or if someone were perfect, what would it mean for that person to be perfect? Perfect in what way? Like, there is not a single living organism with perfect eyesight. Because what does it even mean to have perfect eyesight? Like, seriously, I'm asking the question, what does it mean to have perfect eyesight? And I almost guarantee, no matter who you ask, they'll have a different definition of what perfect means in that instance. You know, does it mean to see like an eagle? Does it mean to be able to see like an eagle and have x-ray vision and night vision, and it never gets blurry, there are no blind spots? Like what I'm just off the top of my head, just like, what does it mean to be perfect? What does it mean? Like, I can see underwater at any depth. I don't need, doesn't matter how dark it is, doesn't matter how bright it is. I can always adjust perfectly, I guess, you know, in order to ascertain whatever it is I'm looking at. I just don't know what it would mean to have perfect eyesight, you know, because is even if you have what they consider 20/20 vision, it's 20 as the denominator and the numerator. But what if the denominator weren't 20? Like, why is it 20 as opposed to some other number? You know, I guarantee there's an answer for that. I just haven't looked it up. But like, why is it 20/20 and not 20, not something else? Like, why is it not like 846 or whatever the fuck? Like, why is 20 the number? Is it arbitrary? Probably. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't know what it means to be perfect, and I don't think that any imperfect being could recognize perfection, whatever it means to be perfect. I just don't get it. So, there's just a lot of these concepts with which we don't truly give the amount of thought that is appropriate when we're really trying to get into what these means, what these words, these concepts mean at a more fundamental level. You know, as opposed to just how we use them in common parlance, you know, which is fine, how we use it in common parlance, but it's just when we really want to dig into what we're talking about, especially when we get into these deep philosophical discussions, you know, with dealing with these notions of gods and spirits and ghouls and ghosts, goblins and demons and angels and all this other hubbub. Anywho, why the hell you gotta be live when I have to get the crotch goblin to bed? Oh shit, sorry, Miss Rose. the fuck is a crotch goblin? I'm like sitting here like I would consider myself a crotch goblin because I gobble crotch historically. Just say, I don't know what a crotch goblin. Eyesight is a physics problem. That's right, dark mage. Goddamn right. What's going on, Smez? I appreciate the diversion. I gotta get some coffee, bro. Like I'm fucking. I was peeing as you were talking about perfect vision. But you get what I mean. Like I don't know what it means to be perfect outside of it does the job exceptionally well for what it was intended to do. You know. Oh, okay. Do you like Slipknot? Yes. Stay blind-ish. It's better. I know, right? How you been? William Santiago asks. I've been maintaining, sir. A little stressed out. Perpetually angry. But okay, I suppose. I'm a little bit salty because I want to go to fucking NanoCon. And I'm not going to be able to go. So, whatever. I'll go to the next thing.